Right, so Aditya, our main episode is about social media, and this is a good segue from our last Risky Wrinkle, which is about the protests, and we did mention how social media can contribute to the distortions in the discourse, and we've made several promises in other episodes that we were going to have an episode on social media. So there's a lot of link backs to previous episodes.
But one of the biggest problems is, I think, certainly this concept of amplification. We talked about this briefly in our protest episode. So in social media, it's very easy to build a movement. It's very easy to build on what somebody said, and then somebody else repeats that, and then there's a retweet, or there's a share the post, or there's a response to that. And so in a sense, it's going back to our very first episode, the very structure of social media allows you to get this sort of exponential growth that we talked about when we talked about why COVID spreading is so dangerous. And it's this possibility for very quick amplification that I think makes social media very dangerous, because things that are incorrect, things that are not thoughtful, things that are perhaps not useful to any individual or society, and in fact not just not useful, could do harm, can very quickly reach a vast majority of people, at which point it just becomes for many people accepted as truth because it is being shared so widely. So there's a sense in which we base our notion of truth on what those around us think about, and we should talk about that as well in terms of not just preaching to the choir and staying within your own social group when you search for evidence. But beyond that, it's true. I mean, if I see all of my friends saying something absurd, like there was a clock found inside of a black hole, then I might start to believe it if I didn't have any other way of gauging the truth, if I didn't have a NASA website to go to or something like that to look for. So one main issue for me is amplification, and amplification can amplify good messages, but it can also amplify bad messages. It can amplify untrue messages.
Mm-hmm. So we should talk about why this is particularly problematic in social media, because there are other forms of media, and in the past we had amplification. So for instance, journalists would report on what other journalists are saying, and then you would get a national or international consensus about what is happening in the news. But before social media, you had more structured forms of media, which meant there was more filtering of the news. There's more fact-checking, and it was more deliberative. It was slower.
Yeah.
So there was more opportunity for corrections to get into the system before the amplification got out of control.
Yeah.
So we need to differentiate the different types of media. The problem of amplification is itself amplified in the technology of social media, where the communication is so quick, and it is also essentially lawless.
Yeah,
right? It is lawless. So there are no filters. Even the social media companies are not responsible for content, so they have no incentive to filter, although they do filter in sometimes perverse ways, where the social media companies have their own agendas. So they will filter out certain discourse about the COVID emergency, and they'll filter in stuff that they do agree with. But that filtering is voluntary. It's not legally required, and it has no civil liability. So I mean, this is a problem we should talk about later. That you can libel and defame and lie, and there are no civil liability consequences for that in social media. But if you do it in print, if you do it in a print newspaper, you can be sued.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the perversities. This is one of the avoidable perversities about social media, is that content is treated differently in civil liability.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and hopefully we can talk about that on our one of our upcoming episodes. I think we have a guest who talk us through also how do you parse things and information that might be coming to you from social media. So look out for that. But I think that's part of the issue, certainly, Bruce, is, but I think part of the issue might also be the framing of social media. So there's a sense in which everyone on social media is a content creator now. And I'm very glad for some parts of it that we are able to do these and we're able to have these conversations and engage with our audience. But at the same time, it feels like there is very little accountability, and there's a clear incentive for people on social media to amplify beyond just informing their friends. So if you think about print media or something like that, maybe somebody told me something shocking, I'd call up my friend and say, did you hear that there was an earthquake on Mars? But in the case of social media, it's not just, did you hear there was an earthquake on Mars? I want to warn my friend. It's, if I say that there was an earthquake on Mars, or even better, if I say there was an earthquake in the Amazon rainforest, for example, which I don't, as far as I know, there isn't one right now. But if I said that, then I might get a lot of shares. I might get a lot of likes. I might get a lot of followers. And so there's an incentive to post, not just for the publishers. I think there's always been an incentive to publishers to post attention-grabbing headlines, but there's an incentive for the consumers now and everyone on social media to post things that are attention-grabbing. And there's a very clear metric for it. There's likes, there's the number of comments, and it makes it very easy for you to track that. In fact, the charts that Instagram gives you, one of the charts is how many followers are you gaining, how many followers are you losing. So I think a thing that really bothers me about social media is that it rewards quantity over quality. It rewards amplification over engagement. And
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because what you're talking about is where the structure of the system actually amplifies, rather than just the consumer behavior, or I should say the user behavior. So the user is amplifying certain content that they agree with, but the system itself is amplifying the content by, I would think of it as a sort of, there's a positive feedback loop. So the more likes or the more retweets that content gets, the more the system actually advertises that particular content. Mm-hmm. So in some social media, the user will be told that this is trending right now. This issue is trending right now, or this is going viral, or it will report to you that this is getting a lot of likes. And then that is reinforcing people to go and check that particular content. So the system itself is amplifying quantitative data, quantitatively measured content, not qualitatively measured content. Although, as we've said, there are these filters built into the system. So now there are, just to explain, the social media companies sometimes have rules about what they allow to post, and some of those rules are legitimate, such as we don't want pornography or violence or something like that. They are backed up by criminal law in taking those actions. But they also have political agendas and social agendas. So a good example of this is YouTube and Facebook have agendas with what sort of content is allowable about the COVID emergency. So people who want to express skepticism about the lockdown are finding that either their content is removed or their content is not appearing in the search engines. And that might sound fine if you are filtering out the weird and wacky conspiracy theories about lockdown. That lockdown is mind control, there's an agenda, authoritarian agenda or something. And so if you disagree with that, you might think that's perfectly legitimate. But it is being used much more widely than that. So any filter is imperfect, and the filters make approximations, and then they're algorithms. They're not necessarily humans in the machine learning algorithm about what is COVID skeptical content. So you could end up saying, I wish the COVID lockdown would end soon, and that could get banned. Right? You're not peddling a conspiracy theory, but because of the imperfections in the system. So this is a real problem. It's becoming a political problem where certain politics are not being allowed, so being filtered out. And it's getting, when I say it's a political problem, as in it's being tabled as a political issue, so it's being discussed in Congress. And obviously, the United States President Donald Trump is making an issue of it because he is often targeted by the filters. So he wants to tweet something and Twitter will say that is fake news. We won't allow it. Which, again, you could say that's fine. We shouldn't have fake news. But these same companies are really bad at filtering out other fake news that they are less concerned about for their own reasons.
Bruce, it sounds like what you're talking about is accountability in the sense that, and transparency, and we've talked about transparency a lot in the past. Now, I'm going to take the perspective of the social media companies for a moment, and I think there's a reason why many of them are not being transparent. I'm not saying it's a valid reason necessarily, but it seems like the reason not to be transparent is because there might be a deeper issue. And the issue is that if I'm YouTube and I publish my algorithm for how I'm filtering things, which any self-respecting scientist, when you want to filter on something, you're going to say, this is how I filter the signal from the noise. But if a social media company were to do this, well, what's to prevent people from coming in and saying, okay, thanks for your algorithm. Now I'm going to come up with a counter algorithm to make sure that I pass the maximum amount of my content, good, bad, ugly, through your filter. So it feels like there's this game that is going to be played. And so if I'm a social media company, it might be in my best interest to say, well, I'm going to do what I like. And it creates an illusion of fairness by saying that nobody can peek behind the curtain, but that also means that whoever's behind the curtain can do whatever they like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it maybe speaks to a deeper issue, I'm thinking, about humility, narcissism, what's our role in this? But
well, I think, first of all, I think it would be a very simple solution to say that social media companies have the same civil liabilities for their content as print media. Right? That would be an easy fix. Your posing of the algorithm intellectual property protection argument is fine. I don't think we need to look at the algorithms. Yeah. What we need to look at are the criteria that you feed into the algorithm. So if a social media company is filtering out COVID lockdown skepticism content, there should be transparency about that. What happens actually is that in practice, some social media companies, I'm not going to spy, they are manipulating this proprietary lack of transparency and their posture as champions of free speech. So, for instance, when there have been exposés of content that is being filtered out, there's something wrong in the algorithm, and I just don't buy it because the filtering out is so specific. It's like you cannot find certain people. So certain people who have who garner a reputation for having a certain politics or a certain strong position. So this happened to an epidemiologist who is at Stanford, and by ethos and by formal credentials is a perfectly respectable epidemiologist, not a fringe epidemiologist, but he has been very skeptical of lockdown from the beginning, and he could not be. His name was taken out of the search allowables or rewardable search terms in YouTube. So all the interviews he was doing with various different content creators were not coming up as found in the search engine. And Google, which owns YouTube, said this was a technical error and they fixed it.
Interesting.
I don't buy that because it happens too often. So I'm really uncomfortable with this, the space that social media companies have to manipulate the two contradictory postures of we're for free speech, but don't expect us to be transparent about how we actually filter free speech.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that comes back down to how do you, I mean, it's contradictory at some level. And understandably, there's technical problems with this. The magnitude of data that they're dealing with is very large. So it's hard to imagine a social media company working without some sort of filtering. And I think my frustration with it might be even worse than that, in the sense that it seems to have stripped us of certain human values, going even further. And in doing so, maybe we're not asking the right questions. We're not having difficult conversations on social media. We're not engaging in the sorts of discussions for which I think free speech was designed. If you think about why do we have free speech? Well, some people might disagree with me on this, but I don't really think the founders of whoever put free speech in the Constitution said, oh, the purpose of free speech is so we can share all of the delightful pictures of our time on the beach this afternoon. I mean, sure, great, that's fine. I'm glad you went to the beach, but it feels like there's something else there. There's a spirit that social media seems to be missing. And perhaps it's not our place to talk about spirit as scientists, but it's also hard not to do so, in the sense that it has made discourse more difficult. And insofar as discourse is essential to the progression of science and progression of ideas and to the progression of good decisions.
Yeah. So this reminds me of the past, particularly in the Western liberal tradition, that the news media, so I'm talking about what we now call as traditional news media, so print and then later radio and even television, were regarded as the fifth estate. So a free and fair press were regarded not just as a news source, but as something that contributes to democracy and contributes to an informed, educated, and civically engaged population.
In principle, let me push back in practice. I mean, it feels like, what can we do? So this is a question I'm posing for us, but also for the general public. What can we do in order to foster the sort of engagement and the value of real engagement? Because as a purely economic issue, if I'm a traditional media company and I want to make money, as most corporations do, Facebook is much more profitable than many, not just a single app Facebook, but as an example, right? Many of these social media companies are enormously profitable for very little effort. If you think about the physical effort required to go out and collect the news. I don't have to buy a van. I don't need to hire reporters. I don't need to investigate things. I don't need red teams. I don't need fact checking. So the barrier to entry is very low. And what that presents is a very difficult economic dilemma. If there's a really easy way to increase your eyeballs, therefore increase your revenue, why would you not take it unless there was some sort of repercussion for that?
Let me answer that by taking an extreme position. So this is where I'm going to be quite personal and prescriptive. So prescriptive meaning this is my advice. So an extreme position is you don't engage in social media. And I have colleagues who have the same attitude, and there are celebrities who have adopted that attitude because they're uncomfortable with their experiences on social media. So the reason for this is that you are effectively acting as your own filter. So if we now live in a world where most information is being shared in social media, and in fact most content is being generated in social media, and if we value educated filters and we value accountability and transparency, then why don't we take a consumer's decision to favor the suppliers of information who also engage in the sorts of filters and editing and structures, accountability, transparency, that we know leads to a better quality of news. So our first solution is personal. We as consumers can make decisions not to consume certain forms of media, at least not for the news. So we can. So let me be really personal. I use social media, but I don't use it for the news. I use social media to socialize within a small group of society, which I know in other contexts, or I know for largely social reasons, so non-professional reasons. I'm certainly not going to use social media as my primary news source. So I'm going to separate my my sources of information from my social world, from my professional world, and from the larger international, national news world, right? So I'm going to go to the traditional media for my wider news outside of my social network. So, that's my solution. And you can persuade me I'm wrong, but I think the world would be a more factual and evidence-based place if we all passed our communications that way.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you on that. I think I'm going to push back that there is also a fundamental problem in what social media makes us think of ourselves. So there's a self-perception that, Bruce, you seem content using social media in a limited fashion, but it means that.
Well, just to correct you there, I'm not sure you're content. I'm not sure I'm content because sometimes those two worlds bleed.
Yeah.
So you make a contact in social media who turns out to be a troll.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to correct that.
Sure.
So somebody poses as a friend of a friend and then turns out to troll. Like we put out videos, it's very easy for people to troll videos.
Absolutely.
Misrepresentations in the comments. That's how social media works. So you can't. I'm not saying you can separate your social world, your intimate social worlds, at least, from your professional or your wider engagement worlds. You're not necessarily content, but I think it is a structured way of engaging with the media. At least it's structured.
Well, I'm going to go further and say, though, that even our social relationships have gotten messed up by social media.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So it's I think what you said about certainly not using everything you believe on social media as a better way to consume information. Sure, absolutely. And we'll talk about, again, I'm really excited for our guests coming up to talk about how do you actually think about information coming at you from the web. But at the same time, I have been, since we're talking personal, I've been very disappointed in the quality of engagement on social media. So let's talk about the terms. So for example, at least Facebook, you make friends. And that seems like a rewarding prospect if they truly are your friends. But on Instagram, you have followers and you follow people. And to me, that's a very clever use of rhetoric. In that, of course I want followers. It makes my ego feel great. And sure, I would love to traipse around and have all these little ducklings running behind me. But is that really discourse? Is that engagement? Are people to be treated as these little ducklings that are following others? It concerns me the very terms we use, or likes. So I think almost all social medias have likes, but very often likes are not a consequence of actually having read a post, digested it, and having some sort of agreement. It's a measure of how much of a bang it's making.
Yeah.
So I think it's leading to a conversation that is extremely narcissistic, where everyone thinks that they are um, a celebrity, and therefore the voice, a measure of how thoughtful, a measure of how correct somebody is, a measure of somebody's own self-worth is related not to the quality of their thought, not to the effort that one has put in, but to the number of likes a picture has.
Yeah, so let me point out, I mean, I'm just taking some notes here because this is, you're articulating this so well, and you're actually stimulating several dimensions to this I think we need to explore. The way you posed the follower dynamic is you posed it from the perspective of the leader.
Yeah.
So the leader can have a narcissistic reaction to having lots of followers. This is great. So it is damaging the virtues of the leader or the influencer. Like, so typically we talk about influencers in social media, but really they're leaders and followers. Now, but let me go to the followers side of this dynamic. It's not healthy for the follower either, because they're adopting a passive, consumptive relationship with the leader or the influencer. So this is not really dialogue. It's I want to follow you. You tell me how to think, or give me content. I'm just going to consume your content. And you know the stereotype. We all know the stereotype of how extremely passive and gullible followership can become in social media, where somebody, stereotypically will not believe politicians.
Yeah.
They won't believe anything politicians say. They won't follow politicians, but they'll get their advice on how to vote from an actor.
Yeah.
This is for me, this is a real distortion. There may be actors who are very articulate about politics. I've actually never heard one that would influence how I vote.
Yeah.
And there are good reasons for that. By what qualification does an actor have to tell me, I happen to be a political scientist, so this is particularly personal. Why on earth would I think that an actor has qualifications to tell people how they should think politically and how they should vote? But increasingly there is this distortion where celebrities outside of their expertise are having incredible influence.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point out how the distortion, that social media is distorting the personality of both the influencer or leader as the follower. Now, you mentioned the leader or the influencer has an incentive to be narcissistic. I think that happens at the followers end of this dynamic too.
Absolutely.
So they can feel that they have privileged insight. So they are receiving. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think privileged insight, or there's a sense in which it's tit for tat. Let me give you an analogy. So I like to think of this as, I was talking with a family member earlier this week about types of conversation. And it feels like the sort of conversation that you and I are having is right now is somewhat like tennis. And this is not my own analogy. I took it from somewhere else, but the context is for social media now. So we're having tennis in the sense that there's a ball that's being tossed back and forth, and we are engaging in a conversation. I say something, and you respond to it. Social media doesn't feel like tennis. It feels like bowling. It feels like bowling in the sense that I'm going up to bowl, and I'm the leader now, and I'm going to throw my strike, and everybody else cheers for me, which is fantastic. I love bowling. I enjoy the game. And then there's a number of pins that fall, and that you can think of as the number of likes. And then it's the followers' turn, and then you go back and you throw the ball. But it's not really a fair game of bowling either. because some people certainly have much bigger bowling balls and many more pins and many more turns. So it's like this really twisted game of bowling, but there's also pressure on the follower. So if I see a whole bunch of posts, then I might feel compelled to post a picture that for no other reason than that there's a lot of other pictures out there. And not because I've had an insight or not because I want to engage with people in a conversation. And from personal experience, I can say that when I've tried to post things that include things like DM me, let's talk, I don't get very many responses. But of course, if I posted a new haircut, then I would, right? So it's the sense in which there's a aloof acknowledgement of other people in our society and an intrinsic narcissism within my bubble surrounded by screens.
Yeah, I think there's another, you've made me realize there's another personality type or posture that is encouraged in the follower, and that is, so the follower becomes a consumer,
right?
Rather than somebody engaged in a dialogue. It's just passive. It's just give me stuff to consume, and because I follow you, I have a posture of appreciating or liking what you're throwing me. But now the follower's relationship with the leader or the influence is they're just consuming entertainment. So this is corrupting the content, the quality of the content, because now we're not by default looking for facts. We're looking for entertainment.
Yeah.
And what is, as you mentioned earlier, what is entertaining or at least eye-catching is often sensationalist. So there are incentives to distort the facts in order to grab attention. So you sensationalize what's going on in the world in order to grab attention. So that's taking us away from the facts. So that's the influencer's problem.
Yeah.
So they have an incentive to sensationalize. But we as the followers or consumers, we have a perverse incentive, which is, I just want to be entertained. I don't want to engage with you. I don't want to respond to you when you post a request for a dialogue, but it's easy for me to like your new haircut.
Yeah.
So it is cheapening.
And I think you're bringing up another point, which is really interesting, about the illusion of closeness. So people who go and look me up on the Google, if Google doesn't get rid of it, would know that I used to race triathlon. And one of the remarkable things about triathlon in the good old days, still probably now, is that one got to race side by side with the best in the sport. And you wouldn't go to an NBA game and just start dribbling the ball in the middle of the court. You'd sit there and you'd watch. But social media creates these similar sorts of behavior where you think that because Twitter would allow you to, I can send a tweet to any famous person I like, that somehow I am having a conversation with them. I'm not going to name names, but pick your favorite actor or pick your favorite politician and send them a tweet. And are you really having a conversation with them? No. So there's this sense in which we're all clamoring on the part of the follower to get recognized. And that also, I think, puts a tremendous amount of power in the hands of those who would misuse it, who are leaders, because all I have to do is be famous, and then people will send me stuff, and I can say, oh, look, now you I like. And I'm going to make your day because I took 3 seconds to respond to your post. And now that makes me the greatest human being on the planet, and I can go around doing terrible things for the next 23 hours of my day. I'm not saying that celebrities do this or famous people do this, but it allows you, I think, to, like you said, have a very cheap response, and it allows followers to have an illusion of closeness with people they're not actually close to.
Yeah, and I think, again, I entirely agree with you. Now, you've posed your insight at the influencers or leaders end of this spectrum. Now, what I'm also struck by is from the follower's perspective, if they are engaging, if they have the illusion that they're engaging with an actor or let's say a politician, they have an illusion that they are politically engaged.
Yeah.
But what actually they are doing, they are diverted from real engagement.
Yeah.
So they are making the effort to send a tweet to their politician, and they think, oh, I've expressed my opinion, and I'm having an influence on the influencer.
Yeah.
But you're not really, and it's a very stilted form of engagement. Even if the politician is reading your tweet, it's the tweet, it's a few words. It doesn't have the capacity of other forms of engagement, such as writing a letter to your congressperson, or going to a town hall meeting, or taking the greater time it takes to consume different outlets of news on the politics, and talking about it and working out your ideas on the politics and exploring the issues, reading up the policy offerings from different candidates. That's such a much more deliberative process that I fear people are being diverted away from with this illusion of engagement through social media, which is so much more accessible and available, and it has the illusion of intimacy. And if people think that they are actually reaching politicians or they're reaching the wider world, this is an even greater illusion, is that people are reaching this ethereal blob of humanity. They think that, I've expressed my opinion, anybody can read it. Well, okay, in theory, anybody could read it, but guess what? Nobody is.